So Batman gets a new Batsuit in this story, and it looks absolutely amazing. But the lead up to the reveal of the Batsuit is equally as awesome. So what this does, this being the continuation of Matt Fraction's run, we're in Batman #2, this initially picks up with Damian Wayne just learning how to wash a car. Right now, one of the cool things, and Matt Fraction's really big about this, for those of you guys who are not familiar with his storytelling style, Matt Fraction will run multiple plots at the same time, but not all of them will be equally important. There's the main plot, and then there's just character development on the side. And that's kind of what you're going to be seeing with Damian Wayne over the course of this. For all you Damian Wayne fans, his character is going to get some really, really interesting development here. In a lot of ways, he's just kind of learning, right? Just kind of continuing on the idea of him being humbled, learning what it means to do small things so he can appreciate the value of doing big things. And so he's basically being made to wash the Batmobile. The other cool thing that goes on is Tim Drake is actually learning how to drive. Now, he's already capable, right, when it comes to just driving a vehicle, but he doesn't know how to drive stick shift, and he's going to be learning on like just rusty old junker, right? And we're actually going to get this cool revelation in terms of like what it's like to drive the Batmobile here in a little bit. But it's one of these things where it's just kind of like a rite of passage type of situation. But this small little moment will become important as we get further into the story. And so what this does is this switches over to the here and now, right? Because that moment was in the past. And in the here and now, we're basically in the slabs, the far east side. And you've basically got like some criminals who were doing some stuff, right? Just like knocking over a delivery truck. And of course, Tim Drake shows up on the scene as Robin, as part of his patrol. He confronts these guys, and he's kind of trying to figure out what they're taking, right? Is it like jewelry? Is it clothing or something like that? And it just turns out that it's baby formula, right? They're literally stealing baby formula because he's got a baby and it needs formula, right? So it's a crime of desperation, not a crime of violence, right? Stealing for the sake of stealing. But then the two of them are confronted by a couple of cops. Now, this is where the last video that we did ended, right? Where Robin's just kind of standing there. He contacts Batman and he's like, hey man, do you have ears on? And Batman's like, of course, right? It's an emergency frequency. And he asked the question, is there anybody on the police force that we're friendly with these days? And so this thief that Robin was basically chasing down goes to take off, and one of the cops kills him. He shoots and kills him. And Robin's just like, dude, what's your problem? Right? And this guy, right? This cop just says suspects fleeing the scene may be treated as hostile and can be stopped by any means necessary. Now on the ground. And so at that point, he throws down like a mini flashbang, which also emits a kind of dust, and then goes to take off. And the cop shoots Robin, like shoots him right through the side. And so woe betide the poor soul who shoots a Robin. This is going to be really interesting though, right? This is going to be one of these really interesting things because Robin wakes up in the back of basically the police transport, right? Because he's not dead. And of course, Robin being Robin has caught a bunch of these guys either right now or at some point in the past. So they're none too friendly. And so at that point, it's just kind of like, okay, right? Robin's just like, I think we're all having a pretty lousy night here, fellas, right? Let's just keep cool. And all these criminals in the back are just like, nah. No, we're not going to keep cool, bro. Number one, we're frustrated. And number two, we're going to take that frustration out on you. And it's one of these hilarious things, right? Because Tim Drake basically becomes Rorschach, right? You know, I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped in here with me. And like attacks everybody. Now, it's a self-defense thing, but he's holding his own against all these guys. And in fact, even one of the cops says that. One of the cops is just like, the kid's kind of holding his own, right? And then the other cop, right? The shooter, right? We'll call him that he just kind of like veers the vehicle off to the side. But it is enough for Tim Drake to be able to break the handcuffs that are bound around him, which is a pretty dope moment. And one of the guys is just kind of like, damn, dude, the kid got free. Like, how in the world did he do that? But of course, what ends up happening is because they're not paying attention, they fail to notice that Batman has thrown down a spike strip. And they run over this thing, right? The tires bust, vehicle goes flying off to the side, and then Batman just opens the back door for Robin, right? And of course, he's there to get Tim Drake out of there. But the funny thing is, like, Shooter runs up on him, right? And it's just like, do not move. And Robin tells Batman, right? Be careful, that one shot a fleeing suspect in the back and killed him, right? He is a yellow belly coward. And he's like, this guy shot me too. And Batman's just kind of like, huh. Right? He just kind of takes in the entirety of the scene. And this guy says, I'll do it again if I have to. And so will my partner. Like, we are not afraid. We'll do whatever we have to do. And so that's when you learn the guy's name is Vargas. And Vargas like addresses his partner. He's like, so you're on their side now, right? The side of criminals and vigilantes. And his partner's like, dude, what are you talking about, man? Like, it's Batman and Robin. They're on our side. So this cop Vargas is clearly mentally unstable, right? This guy has no business carrying a gun. But when you're Vandal Savage and you're running the Gotham City Police Department and you are already a villain, right? If you're a bad guy running a police force, you do not want good guys working for you. You want bad guys working for you. Why? Because you're a bad guys do bad guy things. And so that's how situations like this play out. And so that's where Batman addresses Vargas, right? Police brutality and murder puts us on opposite sides, officers. And that's where Vargas is like, says the vigilante, right? And then that's where you learn the first name of Vargas, which is Eddie, right? Eddie Vargas. And so when Vargas points a gun at Batman, his partner points a gun at Eddie, and it was like, dude, do not do that. Like, you better not do that. And so basically they open fire. And when that happens, Batman, of course, shields Robin when Tim Drake jumps behind Batman. But it turns out that Eddie's partner shot Eddie himself. So it's like literally this crazy situation unfolding here. And Batman even says that, like, good Lord, right? He shot his own partner. These guys literally shot each other. It's bananas. But then when Batman's down there and he gets up to go to walk away, like Eddie just sits up long enough with a shotgun and shoots Batman in the back of the head. And so Tim Drake is just like, what in the hell? Like, what is going on here? Now, of course, Batman's not dead, right? I mean, the guy's got, a bulletproof helmet and all that kind of stuff. If you're Batman, the first thing you're going to do is develop some kind of piece of armor that's going to protect your dome piece. You know what I mean? Like, it'd be pretty embarrassing. Batman's first night out, he just gets 2 in the dome, and that's the end of him. So it makes sense that he's not going to die here. And even Tim Drake tells him, right? Like, I mean, you got your bell rung, my guy. It's a shotgun blast to the head. It's no small thing. Get in the Batmobile, and I will drive us out. And so, of course, Eddie's partner basically survives through all of this, and it's just kind of sad about the fact that he ended up shooting his own partner. But he will come back, and it will be important. Now, here's where you get to the Batmobile segment, which is kind of cool, right? So, like, Tim Drake's driving this thing, trying to get Batman back. He's still learning how to drive a stick shift. He just, like, looks down at the gear shift, and he's just like, how many gears does this thing have anyway? And Batman's like, it has 13. And Tim's like, really? Right? And he's like, what do you need 13 gears for? And Batman just says, it's got the standard 9. 3 quantum gears for use during spatio-temporal crisis events. And he's like, then there's the secret gear, 13. And he doesn't tell Tim Drake what it is, right? He doesn't tell him what the 13th gear is. So here's what I want to know from you guys, right? Give me an answer down in the comment section. What does the 13th gear do? What does the 13th, I just got to know, what does the 13th gear do? I feel like we need an answer to that question. But the fact is, again, Vandal Savage is a villain. He's been in charge of the Gotham City Police Department for quite some time. And I gotta be honest with you guys, Vandal Savage has been a major foe of almost all the major superheroes in the DC universe and even the Justice League. He's been around for quite some time. He has never been more terrifying and more of like an imminent threat than he is right now as the commissioner of Gotham, which really makes you wonder like why it is that they always made him some major foe that would pop on again, off again, that would basically be like the main enemy and what, like DC 1 million or something like that. It's been forever since I read that story. Like it's nuts that they never used him on this small of a scale. But what he ends up doing here is he just kind of surveys the scene. But then like when Vandal Savage is approached by reporters who are just like, can you answer any questions on what happened here tonight? He literally just looks at one of his cops, which is actually a mercenary, and just says, remove the reporters, break their cameras, and break their jaws. And then he just addresses everybody directly at a meeting in the Gotham City Police Department later on. And he says, you might not know who was responsible for this shameless, cowardly attack on our brothers. I know the mayor and your old leadership entertained certain arrangements with regard to amateur law enforcement in Gotham, but I'm changing policy. If the mayor disagrees, then he can ask one of you to arrest me. Until then, consider these department-wide standing orders. Batman and Robin are now criminal combatants and enemies of the Gotham City Police Department. And that's what makes Vandal Savage so dangerous. Because here's the question that I would pose. Who really has power? The person that the police and the military directly answer to, or the person who tells the person that controls the police and the military what to do? Who really holds power? Who really controls what happens? And it's the person controlling the police and the military. The other person is just a figurehead, right? They give orders which are hopefully followed by the person who controls everything. So the mayor has no real power here. And so the mayor continuing to rule the city of Gotham is just done at the pleasure of Vandal Savage. And at any point, he can just seize the office of the mayor for himself. And there's nothing that the mayor can do because the cops will not answer to him. And so it's one of those crazy things, right? It's a crazy situation. And so at that point, We open up with this really, really amazing moment, right? East Coventry, Monolith, and Burns. And there's this kid named Houston Gray that he's working on a civics project and basically making a kind of documentary of sorts, right? Take one. And he says, okay, Miss Marjorie, how has Gotham changed most in your lifetime? Now, this is an older woman, and she just says, oh, sweetheart, right? All Gotham City ever does is change. And then she asks him, is just like, is that a phone? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, and you're recording me on your phone? And he's like, well, I mean, it's my mom's phone. And that's where Miss Marjorie is just kind of like, well, that's changed. Everybody's on phones all the time. But otherwise, buildings come and buildings go. Street blocks, whole neighborhoods change, but the city is still the city. And she says, maybe people change the most, right? We're all on our own now. Seems like nobody's really helping anybody except for you know who. And then, of course, she's just like, never say his name out loud unless you need him, right? Don't call on him unless you need him. But it's just one of those funny things, right? And that's where Houston's just kind of like, yes, ma'am, right? Clearly respecting his elders. But in the midst of all this, there's gunshots outside. And Houston goes outside with his recording phone and sees the entire scene unfold with Batman. That whole shootout down there. And then he actually gets footage that we didn't know occurred. For example, when Vandal Savage was holding up, right, a batarang to the police that had blood on it and said, this is clearly the act of Batman who attacked these cops, Vandal Savage placed it there. He literally put it there. And then he called the investigator over and was like, look at this. Clearly Batman did this, right? He planted evidence and the whole thing is caught on camera. Now, Vandal Savage doesn't know, right? He has no idea that that's the case. I told you guys, this story is dope, right? He has no clue that that's the case. And so at that point, he goes and visits the surviving cop. And Savage just asked this guy, like, why wasn't this mentioned in your police report? Why didn't you mention anything about a batarang? And this cop actually does a bald-faced lie. He was like, because I didn't see Batman there. I didn't see anything, right? And that's where Savage is like, you and your partner believed you'd apprehended Robin. The Batman came to his rescue. Say his name, officer, put him at the scene, or you'll never say anything ever again. And in that moment, this nurse comes running in, right? This dude's life was saved, right? This nurse comes running in and she's like, stand back from the bed. And Vandal Savage is like, oh yeah, the poor man was just gasping. He was just gasping for air, right? And the nurse is just kind of like, easy now, Officer Davis. So we finally get his name, right? Officer Davis. She's like, easy now, stop struggling. And Vandal Savage just looks at him in what's probably the most menacing shit I've ever seen. And he was like, indeed, save your words, officer, until you're certain you found the right one to say. Right? It's insane. Like, dude, he is so dangerous. I love this version of Vandal Savage. It's one of my absolute favorite versions. And so at that point, you pick up with Bruce Wayne, who of course, goes to see Tim Drake, and Bernard's there, and, Bernard just kind of chastises him a little bit, like, what is it that's going on? Every time he hangs out with you, there's always some instance where he comes back all, bruised and battered and all that kind of stuff. But the real segment here, the thing that actually matters, is actually a back and forth between Annika Zeller and Hugo Strange. Now, Annika Zeller was introduced as part of Matt Fraction's run, and she's working on a kind of psychotherapy, essentially, that focuses more on why it is that violent criminals commit violent acts. And we actually get a little more context here in terms of what she's working on. So if you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, this explains it perfectly well. Because the whole thing kind of kicks off with Hugo Strange asking the question, who gets to decide who is sane and who is not? Now, of course, the response of Dr. Zeller is, I'm not comfortable with that framing. There are quantitative differentiations. And of course, Hugo Strange fires back. Eugenicists use quantum differentiations. This is no different. You may as well have at your patients with a machete and then call it surgery. And of course, the reporter, kind of the intermediary between all of this, just says harsh words from psychologist and patient advocate Dr. Hugo Strange. Dr. Zeller, what's your response? And Zeller just says, dysfunction of electrical activity in the brain can mean profound control dysregulation. My device gives my patients some of that control back. Fear prevents us from having a say in how our minds respond to the chaos of trauma, but it requires trust, care, and time. The crown of storms helps regulate electricity in the brain. It calms overstimulated regions and excites understimulated ones, and along with psychiatric medication, and that's where Hugo cuts her off. And so you take money from Big Pharma with one hand and Wayne Enterprises with the other. What a perfect scam. Selling snake oil would have more dignity. And in fact, the reporter chimes in and is like, actually, Dr. Zeller has received funding from Wayne Enterprises. Has that compromised your work? And she just says, we we received a grant from the Wayne Family Endowment that financed our pilot program, but they have no oversight or input on my work. Now, Bruce didn't know about this. And for those of you guys who don't know, the pilot program is basically a fund that kind of goes out there for any and all methods of like research or technological advancement, but it's a way for Wayne Enterprises to give back to the world, essentially. But Bruce does not oversee every single aspect of this. And so that's where Zeller just says, the money has gone into building a prototype device and launching our first human trials. And that's where he goes just like, I do not need your trials to tell me that I am human, right? If people like you applied your devices to Van Gogh, he never would have painted Starry Night. And that's where Zeller's just like, or maybe he would have painted 100 Starry Nights instead of dying in agony at the young age of 37. But Bruce is kind of overhearing all of this, right? He's listening to everything that's going on, and it just kind of sticks with him, even when he's training with Damian Wayne, right? And Damian just tells him, like, you're distracted, right? Like, focus on what's happening. And that's where Bruce is like, and you're dodging the question. You've been accepted into Gotham University 4 years early. Attending at your age would be an exceptional honor and a challenge. Training with the League of Assassins taught you much, but there is a world out there for you to discover, Damian. And that's where Damian's just like, I've studied combat, martial arts, medicine, criminology. What subject could I have possibly left unmastered? And that's where Bruce is like, the important one, son. Literature, history, poetry. And he's like, and maybe the most important, girls. They have girls in college, Damian, smart ones. And he's just like, it's okay to be scared of the outside world. And Damian's just like, scared, right? I am not scared at all. I fear no man, for my mission is righteous. I mean, how could you forget? It was you who taught me that. Now, let's just be honest with ourselves, right? Damian is a young kid who's like just past puberty or going through puberty, right? He's a teenager, right? He's just a teenage kid. Teenage kids are angsty. They want all the independence in the world with like none of the responsibility that comes with it, right? They want to be independent, but they want to know they have a safe place to come back to, which that's part of being a teenager, right? That's what you provide as a parent. But he also wants to feel safe in the world. And the reality here, right? Once you cut through all the Damian Wayneisms, right, and all that kind of stuff, he's a teenager who's afraid of leaving a safe space. That's really all he is. And this is all he's ever known. It's scary. Leaving home, going to college, going out into this brave new world and having no clue what awaits you. The true test of measure is, can you hack it? Do you give in to the fear, or do you stand up with your chest out and conquer whatever comes your way? Some give in to the fear, and some don't. Damian Wayne, I believe, would probably just spit some mad game. Let's be honest, man. This guy's got riz like you wouldn't believe. But the fact is, at that point, you switch over to Jim Gordon talking to Harvey Bullock. Now, Harvey Bullock runs his own private investigation firm at this point, right? He'd long since quit the cops. And Jim Gordon, while he was a private investigator at one point, did return back to Gotham City Police Department. But one of the things that Jim Gordon tells him is there's something going on with Vandal Savage. He's more extreme than he usually is. He literally just declared a war against Batman and Robin. And so he's just like, things are about to get ugly. And so he's like, I need you to put up the bat signal. And so it turns out the bat signal is not a light in the sky. It's just this little animal that sticks out of a window. And that's kind of the funny thing, is because when Batman picks up Harvey, right, Harvey's just kind of like, how much taxpayer money did we spend on that rooftop flashlight you had all those years, when all it takes is a crappy stuffed animal jammed in a window to get your attention? And Batman's just like, it was Jim's idea, not mine. And that's where Jim was like, I mean, it was a symbol. It was a symbol for them, for the criminals. If they knew Batman was out there, they would be less likely to commit crime. And Bullock is just like, yeah, I know, I get it. I'm just saying. I mean, if it was one of those things where we just needed to call on Batman and we weren't really trying to like scare criminals into not committing crimes, we could just put a stuffed animal in the window, man, instead of blowing all that money. But still, right? It's just one of these funny little moments, right? I love the way that Matt Fraction writes characters. But what Jim Gordon does in addressing both Bruce and Harvey is he says Savage is using the shootout last night to make some changes in Gotham City Police Department policy and operations. He wants to leak to the press that he's got evidence that you're a cop killer. So he's issued orders to shoot on sight and deputized a private mercenary squad to do the job. And I love how Matt Fraction leans into this, because in hearing all of this, people who have been long-standing Batman readers will say, okay, yeah, we've seen this story done before. And Matt Fraction addresses that directly, right? That Jim Gordon continues on. He says the mayor's pushing back for now, but we all know how that will end. Savage and the GCPD are about to declare war on Batman and Robin. And Bruce just says, everything old is new again, right? it goes in cycles. It always does. And so once this information is revealed, you have Harvey Bullock, who's just like, I have a question, Jim. How's Tall, Dark, and Handsome gonna pull his disappearing act, right? He just vanishes off the rooftop away from us when he's standing right there in front of us. And so there's this like truck that's coming down the road, and he's just like, they're going to hit that old woman. And Jim Gordon and Bullock are just like, oh my God, those maniacs. And of course the truck swerves around her. But as soon as they realize the truck didn't hit her, Batman's gone. Like, what a dick. What a dick thing to do. It's hilarious. It's funny. But this is when you start getting into the meat and potatoes of what's happening here. Because at that point, you switch over to Harborview, right? Wayne Experimental Sciences Building. And you've got Edward Nygma, the Riddler. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that up to this point in time, he was basically turning over a new leaf. And in fact, Batman will address that here in a second, because as the Riddler's walking through the building, he just says, when are rent-a-cops as useful as a pair of sneakers? When is a drag race a real drag? When does the rooster miss the sunrise? What did Napoleon do for his toothache? And that's when he just gets like punched in the side of the face by Batman, who's standing there with the dopest stealth suit that I've ever seen, which renders him completely invisible. And he just answers the riddles, right? When they're tied up, when it goes down without a car, when the alarm is off, and when he took the crown. Now, that's one of the things to keep in mind about Riddler. Riddler answers your questions, but he never answers them directly. And the riddles are always clues to the much bigger picture of what's going on. Because despite how he may seem, depending on how a story is written and how goofy the Riddler may come off, he knows pretty much everything that goes on in Gotham at any particular point in time. And so that's why Batman points out and even asks him, right? He says, you were really keeping it together there for a while, Edward. CEO of Nigmatech, so rich you could buy your way out of any trouble. You were on top of the world. What happens? And the Riddler doesn't give him a straight answer. And so the Riddler just attacks him, right? And Batman's just like, stop this, Edward. Like, stop this. Like, you had it all. And now you're just going back to being some lame level criminal. And he just keeps running off riddles, right? When is the filmography of the Beatles incomplete? Why do ears hate bathrooms? Why did the perpetual motion machine get a ticket? Riddle me that, right? Riddle me that. And Batman just says, when it needs help, because there's too much noise in the head. And what, Edward? Tell me, why did the perpetual motion machine get a ticket? And he just says, because it couldn't stop. And so just being defeated and being beaten up, he hands Batman a piece of paper. Now, here's the important thing, right? Go back and look at those answers when it needs help, because there's too much noise in the head. Someone screwed with the mind of Edward Nygma. Somebody broke the brain of the Riddler. And so Batman reads off this piece of paper. When is an unmade omelet crunchy? When it's eggs. Where does the John get the news? Toilet paper. And he's like, what is this? A grocery list? And Nygma just says hours, right? It took me hours. Make it stop. I just want to make my head stop. And so, of course, Batman puts him down with a sedative, right? And so at that point, you switch back over to Houston, who basically goes to this diner, right? Inky's Diner. And he ends up meeting with this old guy who's actually the landlord of the building that Houston lives in, right? He's like, I'm doing a kind of homework assignment. And the guy's like, I don't tutor, kid, right? I don't really do internships. And that's where Houston's like, no, right? I don't want any of that. Like, I filmed something tonight and I think it could be news. And that's what you do, right? You're a newspaper man. And so while he's not really a news reporter per se, he's likely got connections. And so that's one of these things where it's like, this guy can put this kid in contact with the right kind of people. And so at that point, you pick up with Batman kind of trying to figure out everything that was going on with the Riddler while he's got the Riddler with him, right? Obviously going to take him back to the Batcave, that kind of thing. The illusion of Alfred is there, right? Because again, Alfred's dead. He has been ever since Bane killed him in Tom King's run. And so he's just kind of asking, right? Why did Hugo Strange put you up to this little smash and grab, Edward? Going on TV like that, he might as well have put up wanted posters. And Nygma's just like, no, like, you misunderstand. And he can't really complete any meaningful sentences. And so he just asked the question, when ain't Kay harem? And then just falls back asleep again. And so Batman is just like sitting there trying to figure it out. And he's like, ain't, right? Calls attention to itself. K is 1,000. Harem means forbidden. Like, it could just be gibberish. And Alfred's just like, harem has a secular usage set aside. And he's like, it's an anagram, Master Bruce, with a double negative twist. So when is K part of harem? And he says, when it's in Arkham. I believe the Riddler was telling you that your Dr. Zeller has been using her experimental device on the patients in Arkham. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Yeah, Matt Fraction, dude, this guy is an ace when it comes to writing. And I had no idea how his Batman comic would go. This is some of the best Batman's ever been. It takes place all before DCKO, but it's some of the best that Batman's ever been. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.